At the recent Hunter x Hunter Art exhibition, Togashi unveiled a good deal of new info about the Nen categories and proficiency levels of a bunch of different characters. The concept of being category lean, which was first mentioned by Bisky on Grid Island with regards to Gon, was explored, and the exact current location on the Nen diagram, or spectrum, was provided for a number of characters. If you'll remember, Gon was an emission-lean enhancer. This meant that while his natural-born affinity is enhancement, he would naturally learn emission skills a bit more quickly than he would transmutation ones. In the memo provided by Togashi, we also learned that if one is born category lean, such as Gon, but trains only in their innate category, in this case enhancement, they would over time shift to being a pure member of that category. By pure I mean no longer lean. Furthermore, it's implied that if the focus of Gon's Junkin turned exclusively to rock and scissors and he basically forsook paper, he'd become transmutation lean instead. Since he was born emission lean, I would have to imagine it would take much longer for that shift to occur, as he would need to become a pure enhancer first, and only then shift to actually being transmutation lean over time. Bear in mind though, this is just an assumption on my part. Now, as far as proficiency levels go, there's 4 of them and they're represented by the attribute circle, with the proficiency level increasing as we get closer to the center. From the lowest to highest, we have skillful, excellent, natural, and extreme. I'll elaborate on these a bit more as the series progresses, but the important thing to establish and keep in mind right off the bat is that these levels for the most part aren't absolute and objective categories. As in, 2 natural level characters don't have to necessarily be on par with each other combat-wise. What this is judging is their current skill level, willpower, and physical capability relative to their individual ability and potential to improve on it. Let's get into it. To set expectations and have a reference point, I'll always start each of these with a member whose category and proficiency level are entirely within expectations. My own at least. As such, let's begin with everyone's favorite Phantom Trope member, Tank Top Broly, known by some as Uvogin. His proficiency is at natural, the 3rd highest possible proficiency. Dude's a frontline fighter for the most infamous, or apparently full-on famous in Mafia circles post-York-New, criminal group of the modern age, and is a pure enhancer to boot. Makes sense. I have to imagine there would have to have been a reciprocal feedback loop between these 2 facts, which led to him becoming the bazooka-attacking Hulk that he was. As in, the more he fought, the better he got, since his skill set is entirely based on fighting. That is until Kurapika pulled up to cave his chest cavity in, bringing to the job nothing more than his wits, grudge, hacks, ability specifically made to combat the troop using those hacks, and a shovel. Talk about calling a shot before you make it, damn! Netero's proficiency level is rated at extreme. No real surprise there, if any human were to have an extreme rating, it would have to be Netero. Now, the interesting question is whether or not he was already at extreme before starting his 4-year isolationist training, or whether it was it which made the difference in him reaching that threshold. My personal take is that he was already at that level before he embarked on it, since it was established during the flashback that A. he was already at the top of the Nen world at the time, B. he was already in his 50s, like someone else will mention in the future who's on the same proficiency level, and C. he had seemingly already reached the upper limit of his abilities, and this was what was needed for him to essentially reach further beyond. If there were a 5th level of Nen proficiency, he'd have to be the only human up there, I'm sure. Now, as far as categorization is concerned, he is a pure enhancer. No real surprise there, though considering the Bodhisattva is almost certainly emission-based, and that manipulation, which definitely utilizes in making its attacks, neighbors emission, it would have also made sense in my mind to put him, if not exactly in between enhancement and emission, then just a bit closer to it. Next, we have a surprising entry in the form of Komugi, who is an enhancer, and a pure one at that. Even more surprising, her proficiency level is at natural, on par with Uvogin's. This implies the following 3 things. First off, it clarifies a bunch of things regarding the world building of Nen, specifically it builds on geniuses. Second, it supports the previous claim that proficiency levels aren't absolute, but relative to an individual and their abilities. And third, it greatly broadens the scope of enhancement. Let's tackle each point in turn. First off, geniuses are people who haven't had formal training in Nen and aren't fully awakened to it. In the public's eye, they're considered prodigies in their respective fields, such as Neon, Zepile, and Komugi. Since the new diagram has confirmed that Neon is a specialist, this means geniuses benefit from and are restricted in what talents they can develop and excel in based on their respective category. I personally never thought that Komugi's category was relevant to her ability to constantly increase her mastery of Gungi, and was under the impression that it was purely her pledge to commit Sudoku if she ever lost a game that was responsible for her genius. As in, it didn't matter whether she was an enhancer, conjurer, or specialist. The important thing was that she was A. at least partially awakened to Nen, and B. basically under the most severe pledge a person can place on themselves. Basically. A pledge born out of an ironclad will, true, but also one that wouldn't be possible if one were not awakened to Nen on some level. This seems to not be the case, which brings us to the second point. Since she's never had any formal training in Nen, yet has a natural level proficiency, this means that what Togashi's proficiency level is judging isn't one's overall proficiency in Nen, since if that were the case I have to imagine Komugi would barely qualify for the skillful level, but proficiency with their abilities. This can entail something as specific as becoming ever more skilled in Gungi, as in the case of Komugi, or something as general as proficiency in Enhancement and other categories, Nen principles and Nen techniques relevant to your ability, such as Uvogin. I'd also like to add that her having been at natural meant that she still had room to improve and reach even greater heights. As the reigning Gungi world champion, she had only begun to tap into her true potential. This implies that chances are high Meruem would have taken months or even years to defeat her, if he ever even would. Which, yeah. The third point which Komugi, being a natural rated enhancer, implies is that the potential scope of enhancement has been greatly broadened. Togashi has been broadening the scope of all categories more and more these past dozens of chapters, a bit too much in some cases if I'm being honest, but this is a welcome addition in my book. You see, enhancement is no longer limited to enhancing physical traits such as strength, durability, speed, growth, and so on, but is ventured into the realm of the somewhat abstract, we'll talk about Gon-san later, such as the mastery of a specific skill. This implies that someone like Nobunaga, for example, could not only improve his swordsmanship indirectly by enhancing his own and the sword's physical properties, but could potentially directly enhance his swordsmanship, as in his actual skill with the sword, rather than indirectly doing so through the aforementioned enhancement of physical properties. Now, this could actually be interpreted as enhancement staying entirely within the realm of the physical if you take a materialistic approach, such as I personally favor, where a skill is a structure of specialized neurons that have formed, retained, and improved on specific patterns. It's of course impossible to argue for an entirely materialistic approach in the world of Hunter x Hunter, but in this specific case, it's not impossible to do so. Another unexpected, and I cannot stress how unexpected addition to enhancement, is Ikalgo. This is by far the strangest new inclusion, definitely for enhancement, maybe even for all categories, but I don't want to make any definitive statements before I'm done with all of them. Ikalgo has showcased two abilities. The first one is Freedom, which is just a great name. In Japanese, it would be pronounced something like Freedom, which is kind of ironic considering his second ability, Living Dead Dolls, allows him to control cadavers. Freedom basically allows him to turn his tentacles into a rifle, for which he can then conjure ammunition, either in the form of anticoagulant fleas if he's controlling a cadaver through Living Dead Dolls, or regular bullets if he's not. Now, Living Dead Dolls very obviously has to be either manipulation or specialization, there's no real discussion to be had there. As far as Freedom is concerned, the most obvious category would have to be Conjuration, as, and this is quite ironic, transmuting one's body into other objects or giving it morphological properties it doesn't already possess seems to fall within Conjuration. How in the world is he an enhancer? And emission lean at that. To be fair, he could still be one, just went full Castro, and you never go full Castro. That's one possibility. Another is that Chimera ants can't really be considered good exemplars of their categories because of their alien morphology. Alien in the sense of strange and unfamiliar, not in the sense of extraterrestrial. We know they come from the Dark Continent, as they seem to possess innate abilities not directly tied to, but potentially greatly amplified, through Nen. This notion will hopefully become clearer as the series progresses, but it could theoretically be the case that he's simply enhancing his innate abilities. Maybe. The weird and annoying thing is that he was already listed as a manipulator in the Yu Yu Hakusho official character book from 2005, which really made sense, and which this new exhibit info now overrides. And not for the better in my opinion. Well, I talked more about the damn Squid, more than I thought I would. Slight change of pace, Palm is a transmutation lean enhancer. This still makes absolutely no goddamn sense considering her clairvoyance ability, and was a good opportunity for Togashi to errata it. If you want to hear more on this, please take a look at my previous video, 8 nonsensical Nen abilities. Moving swiftly on, Nobunaga is a transmutation lean enhancer. Nothing much to add here, it's a bit surprising, but in a good way. It's unclear whether we caught a glimpse of his ability recently in the manga, or if that was just his pure speed and swordsmanship on display. Though with some enhancers it's hard to differentiate between the two, since they don't go beyond utilizing the principles of Nen, paired with pure enhancement in creating their Hatsu, such as Gon and Uvogin, and sometimes also paired with limitations, such as Finks. As his confrontation with Gon and Kilo implied while he was holding them captive, it could very well be the case that his trump card is the EI-style slash paired with his 4-meter N. I don't see how this would utilize transmutation, and him being lean implies that he's currently been training in it, so I'm hoping there's a bit more to it. Gato, like Ikalugo, is an emission lean enhancer. This makes total sense, since the scents he fires off are infused with Nen, which is the principle of Shu, i.e. coating objects in aura to empower them, and any discharge of pure aura from one's body entails emission. Last but not least, Gon. Well, that's not entirely accurate. If we're talking proficiency levels, he would be least, being the only enhancer ranked as skillful, the lowest rank. So, from what I understand, a character's category membership, i.e. pure versus lean, and proficiency levels, skillful to extreme, should be based on when we last saw the character in question. Now, this isn't particularly clear since it makes sense for some characters more than it does others, which will become apparent as we progress with the series of videos, but if we were to go on that assumption, I would have to imagine this chart reflects Gon after he had met up with Jing atop the world tree. This, A, would mean that Jing was right, Gon indeed hasn't lost his Nen, at least not completely, and B, would make sense, since his proficiency level would have almost certainly taken a hit following his Deus Ex Machina recovery from a state worse than death, which is understandable. As I mentioned in the beginning, Nen proficiency can easily shift a grade based on a character's recent level of training and mental state. I have to imagine Gon was at the very least an excellent during his confrontation with Pito, and could have already been nearing extreme, considering we actually got a separate rating for Gon-san, who is indeed rated at extreme. This goes well with what I had personally imagined Gon-san to be. A pledge with himself to utilize his maximum potential, spanning the entirety of the prime of his lifespan, which for a Nen user could easily amount to half a century considering how young Gon is, in just a few minutes and with the restriction that he would use it only to eradicate Pito, and then suffer a fate worse than death. With his life force almost drained and his Nen gone, no pun intended, he would be left a prematurely aged and decrepit husk, not quite dead, but with death creeping around the corner, waiting until the debt is amassed is paid off in equal amounts of pain and suffering. Good thing Nanika was there to kiss and make it better, am I right? Topic for another video, let's not get into that. You see, Gon-san was not possible only because of Gon's extreme mental state, prodigy level potential, and willingness to suffer indefinitely for a momentary gain, but was also born out of the fact that he's an enhancer. Gon-san, in my mind, is a direct product of enhancement. Bill has an enhancement Hatsu that enables him to stimulate growth and development in living beings. And as far as I'm concerned, that's exactly what, in principle, Gon-san is. Hence why now Togashi has moved him into the pure enhancer category. While Gon seems to have been emission lean like Palm and Ikalugo, I'm never gonna let that go. He opted not to focus on it, and over time shifted to a pure enhancer, as that was what was needed to make Gon-san a reality. Well, this ended up being way longer than I thought it would. As I mentioned in the beginning, I guess we have a new series. The plan is to make at least 6 videos, one for each category, going over and overanalyzing all the info we got. I may switch a few things around here and there, but the main structure and content should be very similar to this initial one. Just, hopefully, a bit briefer. But hey, we'll see. I'm planning on covering transmutation next, so looking forward to that. Before signing off, I'd like to thank Reddit users Mythical Tenshi and Veracious for their translations, as without them, this video would not be possible. As always, thank you very much for watching, feedback is always appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one.